What are you wearing right now? Did you pick that shirt? French philosopher Laplace would argue that you didn't. He says, anytime you make a choice, and I'm going to ask my imaginary spectator to say stop, it's indicative of every single life experience that you've had, and your genetics, and everything that's happened before that. You see, he says that if he had a demon that could look at reality and understand it completely, down to the subatomic particles and their interactions, that demon could look at one moment in time and tell you everything that led up to that moment. But not only that, that demon could tell you everything that's about to happen hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands, tens of thousands of years from that point. That demon could have easily predicted the exact card you would have said stop at today. But not only that, he would have predicted it down to the signature. And of course, all the other options were really just an illusion. So I'm going to ask you again. Did you pick that shirt? Harry Houdini. How good was he really? See, if you ask anyone on the street, random person on the street, if they know the name Houdini, I'm willing to bet money that the majority of people have heard the name, okay? And that's pretty insane considering the fact that he died almost 100 years ago, okay? This dude that was around, he just caught cameras and films, right? But he was a guy that was around when the popular media was newspaper, right? So for people nowadays to know who he is must mean he was truly someone special, right? So what's the question here? What's the argument? How good was he really? Well, if you look at his films, if you look at, the videos of his performances, and you see that, he used to do straitjacket escapes and, handcuff jumping off a bridge, and then, untying himself while in the water, you can see what the appeal was. Huge crowds would gather, right? Huge amount of people would be watching to see what would happen with this Houdini if he was able to escape or if he was not. But even in looking at these videos, you can tell that, for example, the straitjacket escape on video, he just escapes from a straitjacket while being pulled up by a crane, okay? There's no, added element there. He just figured out a way to make everything so big, right? With the bridge jump and escape from handcuffs, there's not really much added by him jumping in the river from a bridge, right? Even if he can't escape, he could probably paddle up and breathe a little bit, So even with these simple escapes that he did, and I'm sure he did stuff that, was more amazing than what we have on video too, but even with the simple escapes, you can see that he's someone that understands how to gather a crowd, how to take something that's an okay effect and make it spectacular, make it sensational. But the question is, how good was he really? And we know he was good at escaping because that's what he's well known for. But the interesting thing is he actually started off as a medium and then also as a magician. So, and for his whole life, he wanted to do a big magic show, and had many attempts, and he attempted to have a show in England, and that failed several times. And he really wanted to have a successful magic show like the other guys that he was competing against, Blackstone, Thurston, all these really big names of the time that could, did huge stage productions. Think, David Copperfield nowadays. Now, there's a lot of controversy surrounding Houdini, right? Because he's such a myth, he's such a legend. People actually absolutely love the idea of a man that cannot be bound by anything, such willpower, such showmanship. Just the name alone is a cultural icon. But the reality is a little bit different. You see, in the book Houdini, The Code Mystery by William Rocher, he basically accumulated a bunch of different first-hand accounts of people that knew him, knew Houdini and his partner Bess, all throughout their life, and basically collected them and figured out why was he so big. And it turns out that actually the reason why he became such a big name, because he was absolutely genius at creating controversy, at creating drama, and at making the news, okay? even after his death, his partner received a message through a medium from Harry Houdini, and that became the news story everywhere. And there's literally New York Times, New York Graphic, New York Register, New York World, Cleveland Plain Dealer, New York Herald Times, New York World, New York Daily News, Detroit Free Press, Springfield Republican, New York Journal, New York Telegraph, were all front page covers that the man who could not be bound has escaped death, as a final escape. So that catapulted him to such a legend, such a myth, such controversy, that he became more than a man bigger than life, right? He became this icon for people that didn't really care about magic, didn't care about anything. I mean, there's many accounts of high-level magicians during that time, guys like Blackstone, guys like Divernon even, guys like, where they actually say, well, he was a great showman. He was an okay magician. Some even said mediocre magician, but he was a terrible person, okay? And so essentially what I learned from reading this book is that Houdini was kind of a dick. In fact, he was a real asshole. Okay, let's put it this way. The name Houdini comes from a man called Robert Houdin, who is credited for, basically blowing up magic and taking it from, the circus to the theater. And he wasn't the only one, but he was one of the prominent guys that basically made magic classy and high class and at the top of the social ladder, right? Houdini was a huge fan growing up, and when he started magic, he was a huge fan of Robert Houdin, and he took his name. So basically, it's like me going, I love David Blaine, so I'm going to call myself Blaney, the Great Blaney, and I'm going to start doing magic, right? Upon his death, Robert Houdin's death, Houdini tried to visit the family, and apparently he was turned away. And because of that, he basically went on a vendetta to try to expose Robert Houdin and to say, wrote a whole book, as you can see. I haven't even finished reading it. But he basically went on to say that, he was all a fake, he stole a lot of ideas, blah, blah, blah. Many magic historians basically think that Houdini was kind of in the wrong there, and he shouldn't have done that. And that's just one of many, okay? That's just one of many. Houdini was also accused by another performer for putting acid in a prop that they were going to use to escape out of, and that was just to try to eliminate competition. So apparently the performer literally went in the bucket, in the prop, and started burning, and then got the hell out immediately. Then also, he stole Blackstone's prop that was an illusion that they competed against. I think Houdini performed it, and he hated Blackstone for also performing it, something like that. And was actually they found the prop after Houdini died in his storage. Okay, so there's many. Divernon, grandfather of magic, well respected by everyone. Houdini lit a circus on fire because there was a magician that was performing his act at that circus. Okay, so you can understand the kind of person Houdini kind of was now, right? You can understand that, like, the level of his competitiveness, the level of him wanting to dominate the space, the level of him wanting to be the best, the greatest, the this, the that, meant that he cared about no one but himself, right? Basically, every major magician, every high-level magician of his time hated him, okay? And could not stand him because he was an absolute fool and an absolute egomaniac. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that he wasn't good, right? The question is, how good was he really? Just because he was a dickhead doesn't mean he wasn't skilled. But there's many accounts of him failing magic shows, not being that great, having to go back to escapes. So, I mean, obviously he found his niche, and in escapes, he became the guy, right? He became the master, the best to ever do it, or whatever. But his dream was always to be a magician. Now, another thing that was interesting is that later on in life, he started a huge vendetta against mediums and, calling the dead and all that kind of stuff. which is ironic because he started as a medium, and there's evidence to suggest that. Basically, that became a huge central piece of his controversy, and his huge, he was in the news a lot because he was constantly challenging these guys. He would put 10 grand up for anyone to try to prove that they can, really talk to the dead and stuff like that. Obviously, no medium was able to perform and prove that. So, he used all his vendetta against every other type of performer just to try to bring himself up. So he was kind of the guy that would, try to smash everyone else's building so that his one would be the tallest. While he was alive, he wasn't even the highest paid magician. He wasn't, you'd expect, everyone knows Houdini, he must have been the best of the time. But actually, he really wasn't. There were many, many guys that had full shows, 2.5 hours, crazy, illusions, all this stuff, which is what really Houdini wanted to do, but never really managed to quite get there. So what happened with this message after death, right? So he broke his ankle performing the water torture cell trick that he was famous for doing, and with a broken ankle, he was chilling backstage, and he invited some people to come backstage, some fans, I guess, right? Now, one of these fans was a man called J. Gordon Whitehead, that was an amateur boxing star, right? And he came in and he asked Houdini, I heard that you can take punches to the stomach. Can we test it, right? Now, according to different sources, Houdini was kind of reading his newspaper or something, and he said, yeah, of course, And before he could have time to get himself ready and tense or whatnot, the boxer hit him repeatedly in the stomach. Houdini played it off like it was nothing and kind of, made them leave and all that kind of stuff. And he continued to perform that same night. Everyone that saw the performance said it was really sloppy, he was struggling with his props, all this stuff. And eventually, he had to be taken to the hospital and had a ripped pancreas and a ripped appendix. And apparently he had some sort of infection also. So basically, because of no antibiotics, all they could do was really open him up, try to take out the broken pieces, and hope for the best, right? And eventually Houdini died from those injuries. Now, apparently his last words to his partner Bess were, "I'll come back to you, dear, if I must go through hell to do it." Then he gave her a secret code so that she could identify that it would be him, and it was Rosabelle Believe. And that was some code that they were using for a mentalism piece that they did together. And according to other sources, she wasn't the only one that knew about this code. So there you go. Then there was a bunch of mediums that tried to basically guess the codes for years, and eventually through many tricks and plays and, a bunch of misses, and I don't have to explain mediumship to you. At this point, it's the 21st century. I think we understand how that shit works, right? But eventually someone somehow got down and figured out, one word, and then she said, "Oh, that's the word," but it's not the full message. And then they tried to figure out the next part, and it was like a year-long process. After, maybe like 3 years after Harry Houdini died, apparently a medium by the name of Ford, I believe, Ford something, gave her the code, and that's when the publicity thing blew up. Every newspaper wrote about the magician who escaped was able to escape death, was able to, communicate once more, blah, 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 blah. And the mystery and the legend of Harry Houdini really took off. Nowadays, there's a whole industry on Houdini memorabilia and fakes of Houdini memorabilia. So the legend of the storyline of his life, he came from nothing and became one of the greatest magicians to ever live, the greatest escape artist. That story is so attractive. It's such a compelling narrative. Then he dies doing, an escape or doing, a stunt in some way. And then he comes back and gives a message after he dies. That whole thing is so compelling that it makes for a great story. It makes for great Hollywood. It makes for great everything. But the reality of the situation isn't quite so great. He was great. He was amazing. People have described him as an excellent showman. But compared to the people that were at his level during his time, everyone that, you know, compares them would say, you know, Thurston was much more elegant, much more put together. He was, you know, he was the magician. He you know, Harry Houdini couldn't compete, so he had to find his own niche, and which is probably what made him so, you know, he was the first famous escape artist, you know. And of course, a lot of his escapes were just magic, right? Like, it's just presenting in a different way. Interestingly, 10 years after Harry's death, Beth, his partner, basically is quoted to say that she does not believe that spirits and ghosts exist. She had this flame that she kept alive for 10 years, and she goes, you know, I don't believe that this is true. I don't believe that anyone can come back. That it's impossible. Good night, Harry. And she blows out the candle, right? And that's a quote from her. So a man who, you know, was so against mediumship, was so against all these things that, you know, he started as someone that made money from mediumship, right? Then he gets into magic and just basically tries to sabotage everyone around him. Every magician that of the time hated him. And then to end his career in a very medium, right? Like he basically wanted to make mediumship illegal. He went into court and all the stuff. So for him to make this a thing where he comes back from the dead to give her one last message, you know, it's so ironic and so contradictory to everything he did in his later, you know, life. So it just tells you the kind of person he was. And I mean, as I said, just because he was a dickhead doesn't mean he wasn't good. But I think in this case, the myth is larger than the man himself. So let me know what you thought about this video. Let me know if you agree with me or disagree with me. I know there's a lot of Harry Houdini fans that are probably super mad at this video, but let me know what you thought. Let me know what you think, and tell me who else I should review next. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.